Well, howdy folks. This is part 3, water management. Today it's going to cover the mostly the pond, the hand-dug pond, and how I did that and what I plan on doing for it. Before I get there, there's something I forgot to mention in part 2. This little path here where water drains, I need to build some dirt ramps that will go up this direction towards this little wall for this raised garden bed. I'm going to do that to slow the water flow down even more and try to get this side of the garden bed, because this is a raised bed, and raised beds in an arid region like this, it's not a good idea. They dry out faster. So hopefully that will help keep this side of the bed more moist for longer. It will also provide support to hold up this wall of logs, and then I can get rid of these T-posts and other little spikes. So that's something that I have on the agenda. I forgot to cover that last time. And also, this same garden bed, it gets dry in this section the most. That's the highest, most raised portion. So what I plan on doing is right here, there's a low spot. I don't know if I'm going to incorporate this into the swales that I'm going to do in the Mexican plum bed, which is just right behind here. But if not, then I'm just at least going to dig a pond here, because a little mini pond, if you will, because all the drainage comes right down into this little low spot, and it already has water puddling there. So I might dig that out a little bit, capture some more water, because actually underneath all this raised bed, it still gently slopes this direction, so that water should end up on this dry side of the garden bed. All right, so with that out of the way, covering what I forgot to do in part 2, let's make our way down to the hand-dug pond and the seasonal creek to show you what I'm doing, or plan on doing for this, what I have done and will do. Now the seasonal creek is going to require something a bit different, perhaps a bit unique. So I'll cover that first, because that's where the most of the input for the pond comes from for now. All right, so in the last video I covered this berm, swale, if you will, lazy man swale. To know what a lazy man swale is, when I use that term, it's basically a debris jam, just a pile of debris that I've thrown organic matter to compost in place, or dirt, or to basically fill in the gaps of the logs. So that provides a relatively solid barrier for the water, and it serves the same purpose as a swale. This is on a contour line. And if I continue this swale all the way through, then what happens is it won't capture the water from the seasonal creek, which you're looking at right there. Now, I have taken the flow of this seasonal creek and dammed it up into a hand-dug pond right there on the other side of this garden bed. And I got the idea for the dam from a few places. Initially, I got it from this creek. And I mentioned in one of my walk-in talks how Zone 5 space can be really useful if you just use it as an example of what to do. And if you look inside this creek bed, you'll notice there's little trees trying to grow in it, like that. And there are logs that have washed in, like this right here. See? And tree roots. Okay. And the volume of water that comes through here is absolutely enormous sometimes. And when it's been 2 or 3 months without rain, there's so much debris, because the flow of the creek is actually 100 foot that direction. It actually goes up a lot more than that, because it goes to the very top of this hill in my neighborhood. But when I say 100 feet this direction, it's 100 feet unmolested. Just no one's done any development on that space. So the volume of water comes in, it's extremely high. There's debris in the creek bed from being dry, and it will catch on these obstacles in the way, and just simply leaf debris and fine organic matter and maybe little bits of sand and dirt, and it packs in. And I noticed it would create such a debris pile. You can actually see some of it here that I dug and dumped out, that it can actually stop the flow of this creek. As much volume of water as it is, it can actually stop the flow and make it redirect. And that is what happened multiple times, which is why you see rocks all along the banks, is that it's blown out these banks by getting backed up. and flown into garden beds and washed away soil and sediment. So controlling the flow of this has actually been necessary. And to get the idea for my hand-dug pond dam, started here by noticing how in nature, simple just leaves, well-packed leaves, can actually be enough to redirect the flow of an entire creek. So that's the first place I got the idea. Now, what am I going to do with this guy? Well, what I need to do is I need to reduce the amount of debris that's coming down into the pond. Right now, I'm using the pond as a sand trap, organic matter, little bits of sand. I'll show you what it looks like. It's actually very, very rich. And I'm using that for potting soil and to fill my garden beds cheaply. But eventually, I'm not going to want that. I'm just going to want it to be an impoundment of water. But I might still want the functionality of occasionally mining things out for silt. So what I'm going to do, what you see here, see this log on the ground? About 18 inches, about right here, begins a utility easement. And 5 feet away from the fence is also utility easement, around there. So any permanent structures on the other side of this log, going 10 feet towards basically this garden bed, is about 10 feet. This section, I can't really put any permanent structures. So I'm kind of limited. The permanent structure, if I'm going to put a lot of effort into a permanent structure to control this water flow, it's going to have to be off the utility easement. So 5 feet away from the fence and on this side of the utility easement, because there's a utility easement this direction as well. So basically what that's going to mean is a dam that starts here and comes around in half moon fashion. So what I have here is a Mustang grape right there. So it's going to come down in front of the Mustang grape and curve up towards the existing berm, which is on that contour line. And I'm going to make it very tall, and I'm going to make the drain right about here, which is on the 5 foot easement away from the fence. So that should drain this way and in front of those garden beds. And you probably can't see it, but there's actually a trench dug all the way down the front, going all the way down. This side I own. If you saw one of my previous walk-in talks, I show you a little preview. 100 foot by 100 foot space this direction, and it's actually uphill, so it actually is already flowing in this way and stopping at these trenches that I've dug, these swales, mini swales. So there's in rain, we'll have for several days water just puddle up here, soaking into these garden beds. And then what I'll do is build the drain for this creek so that the first time we get enough water volume, it's the first drain to start draining, and it will drain down the front of these garden beds. I'm going to build a second drain in the berm I described that will drain down the original creek flow, around through the original creek bed. So that should split the volume of water that's flowing into my pond. How much? I'm still going to have probably the majority of the water flow down the original creek bed, but by building that first drain I mentioned, to siphon water off the top, any floating debris, leaves, fine organic matter should go that direction down the front of the garden beds and enrich that soil. And I can dredge that out if I ever need to, if those trenches ever need work. And it's actually quite easy. And then the only permanent structure I need to build on the easement will be simply a berm, basically right here. Path of least resistance. The water should just flow right down on the other side of that berm down the front of the garden beds. And then if the utility company ever comes and knocks that down, it's very easy. I can build that in less than a day. A little berm that's 10 foot long to make that water go that direction. So, and the same thing with this creek. I can always make it, if they ever damage this creek, I can always just re-dig it and let it flow back into the pond. So that's the idea. And then of course the berm, like I said, would be all off of the easement, so they won't be able to touch that. And that should cause the water to pile up here about 2 feet deep, maybe 3 foot deep, depending on how high I have to build that berm. And it should make the water drop its debris on inside the berm and flow down the first water spout, the first drain spout, before coming down the creek. Now, of course, some debris is going to make it down the original creek flow. So let's look into that. Let's look at this original creek. So you see I've picked up old bricks and whatnot and laid it on the creek banks to keep it from weathering away. So here in the back you see I have a thornless blackberry, and 8-10 inches on the other side of it Once you go beyond that, you start getting to that easement again, okay? So what I want to do is the banks of the creek bed, which are right here, you see the logs laying there, I need to bolster that up. So off the easement where I can do permanent structures without having them torn down, which is going to be just a little bit on the other side of this stump, I'm going to dig a nice big deep 3-foot deep hole, 3.5-foot deep hole, nice and wide between this garden bed and this garden bed. I'm going to dump that soil on this bank to raise that bank up, so that way when we have a high volume, it doesn't blow the bank and try to wash out the garden beds that direction. It'll wash away the soil and mulch, and it's really not good for the plants to have a high volume of water flowing over the top of them. So the other function that will serve is yet another silt trap to slow that water and try to get it to drop its debris before flowing into the pond. And of course the overflow for this is just going to be right into the pond. So let's go into there. Now on the pond, if you look at part 1 and part 2 of water management, the thumbnail contains a picture, because I did take pictures to show the progress of digging this thing. So the way I dug it, you see this stump and this stump. The original creek flowed right through here and went straight over that spout right there, or that overflow drain right there, okay? So what was happening is, to the right of it, I had a natural low spot, and it was just lousy with privet. And the privet had started to spread in like a ground cover, because I foolishly started mowing it, and to pull it out by hand would have taken forever. So, and it was already a natural low spot. When we would have rain, the creek would flow for like 6 months on a normal year. And even if it didn't blow the banks to fill up this spot, which it would occasionally do, just the water flowing across here would seep into this lower spot to the right. And it would create basically a mosquito pond, a stagnant mosquito pond. So I decided what I would do is knock out the creek bank, let it flow into here, and as it got wet, I would dig out the mud and plop it all along the banks. So if I dug a foot down, then I was able to put about a foot around the banks. It's giving me 2 feet of depth. And that's basically what I did. I dug when it was wet in between rains. A lot of times when there was water actually in the pond, because it's just a lot easier to dig in this type of soil. It's basically like digging in caliche. It's rock and clay. There's flagstone in there, which was nice. I created like a little mini sidewalk using the free flagstone. So that's the process of digging this out. The other thing I want to mention about this pond is I want it to be a natural bottom pond. I did not want to use a plastic liner or concrete or anything like that. So I actually had a tough time finding information on how to build a natural bottom pond, especially a small pond like this. I researched, the nature provides a perfect example to look at if you want to know how to do it, and it's beavers. Beavers build ponds like this all the time, and that's basically what I used as my second example when building this dam. So the beaver has an advantage, though. It builds its dam out of debris, sticks, logs, and mud, and packed in leaves and stuff stuffed into the grooves. But Mr. Beaver lives there all year long, and when his dam starts to break down, he just goes down to the bottom of his pond and dredges up some dirt and plugs those holes, which is what I'm doing, but it's a lot harder for me than it is for a beaver, because they're just perfectly designed for it. So I dug this pond out. It was about 2 feet deep all the way around, and what I had hit was a clay layer about a foot deep. And that clay layer, it was holding water really well. I would have water in here for 6 months out of the year, basically, on a normal year. But it wasn't deep enough at 2 feet. I want it to be about 4 foot to 5 foot deep. And so I kept digging. And there's a couple places I punched a hole. Right here, and in this corner as well. So the first one I showed you is the northernmost corner of the pond. I'm going to show you what I've got going on in there, just so you can see. You see all the leaves, which is valuable debris for composting, make leaf compost. But what I want to show you is the quality of the dirt that washes in here. You can see it right there. did some digging before doing the video, so you would be able to see it. But this is what I do. It actually goes down about a foot deep because it's filled in pretty good with that kind of soil, with a very rich soil that you would get out of ponds or creeks or lakes. And let me see. You can see some of that clay component. It's really beautiful stuff. It's about 3.5 foot deep down here if I dig that out. I'll show you the kind of soil you'll get and how much debris gets captured in here. So since I dug that hole, I punched through the clay layer, and now the pond drains pretty quickly. So I'm probably going to seal this pond after I get done digging it with bentonite clay. I don't think I'll use any other type of clay. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. Based on the research I've done so far, I'll probably go with bentonite. I've done some experiments with it. And if I have to, if it comes down to it, I will go with a plastic liner, because to me, having the impoundment of water is extremely important for farming and as well as wildlife. Because whenever there is water in here, those 6 months, 4 months, depending on the year and how much water we get, the amount of wildlife I have, it's just extremely enjoyable for me. So I am an outdoorsman. I love that kind of stuff. So having it in my own yard is just a treat. So, all right. And let me see what else I might need to cover. Well, the dam is probably about it. Just a little bit of details on the dam. You'll see these sticks sticking up. This is something beavers do not do. Okay. You see this one. Okay. And this one right here. Right there. So vertically, I took chop and drop sticks and hammered them into the ground this direction for support, and then laid logs, like punky logs, as you know, just down horizontally where I needed the dam, and then covered that with mud and dirt from the bottom of the pond as it was filling up, which is essentially the exact same process a beaver does, with the exception of the vertical stakes for support. And you can see that, you know, for after 2 or 3 years, this dam is not blown out, but when you use logs and debris under the dirt, they will break down. So that's going to make it lower in height. So now this drain was supposed to be the second drain. I probably haven't mentioned drains yet, overflow drains, but I have an overflow drain here. That's the first drain. It's lower in elevation than the second drain. But now that this has started to break down, the second drain is now lower, so it drains here first, and I don't want that. I want it to drain on this side first because that's higher in the landscape. This direction is downhill. So you always want to try to keep the water, at least in an arid region, you generally want to keep the water on your property as long as you possibly can. So by raising it higher in the elevation, it gives me more opportunities to route this water around before it leaves the property to drop its silt, debris, fertility, and water on my property before giving it to the neighbor. So when you use debris to create a dam like this, there is that downside, but it was okay with me because I just needed a dam right away and quick, and it's very quick to do. And as I dig out this pond, all of what creates this dam is going to be, you know, rock and mud and very heavy material that won't shrink or break down over time. So it should be okay with me. The other downside to using debris is, in addition to shrinking, sometimes they'll break down inside the soil. So you have a solid soil surface here and on top and on the other side, but because there's a giant log in there that may have broken down, the water starts to seep through the soil. It gets in there and it'll start to create like a cave, and then it can flow out the other side. And in that way, it can create like a hole in your dam. So, and that's exactly what I had happen right there. The water started to just ooze out right there at the very bottom of the topmost part of the dam, top about 1.5 feet of the dam. So what I did is to plug it, what I could have done, of course, is to dig out soil from the bottom of the pond and fill it up there very deep and thick, and that probably would have plugged it right on up. But instead, because it wasn't, when I noticed the plug, it wasn't a lot of water in the pond, I just laid down debris across the creek. I put a large log here to brace it, and I poked a log down to give it some support. And then as we've had rains and it's overflowed and, you know, that water is carrying debris, it has actually filled in the gaps for me. And it's actually dammed it up without me having to do a lick of digging. And it's actually plugged this hole for the most part. And I'm just going to keep doing that. I'm just going to keep putting a debris wall up and let the water actually fill in the gaps for me instead of, you know, digging it out. Now, if I happen to be digging, then of course I'll put the dirt where it belongs. But, you know, this is a neat little way to have nature complete your dam for you. Just like I showed you the way the creek was giving me the example earlier when I mentioned that the debris would catch on horizontally running roots and vertical growing trees in the creek bed, and it would pile up. It's doing the exact same thing here, and it seems to be plugging that hole quite nicely without me having to do hardly anything. So as far as the garden, as far as the dam goes, that's about all there really is to it. Now on the overflow, now going down the creek bed here, this is going into zone 5 space. I don't plan on doing anything else to dam up that water. I'm just going to let it, once it comes out of this downspout, it only runs about 20 more feet, and then it's off, maybe 25 feet, and it's off the property. But this side, the first drain spout that it's supposed to come out of, let's follow that and see where that water's supposed to go. You can see it. You can see kind of like a trench coming out here. Over here is the elderberry, so that should moisten it. So you should be able to see that the back side of the garden bed has water flowing down it. And then I already mentioned the front side of the garden bed should have water flowing down it. And that should keep these garden beds nice and moist. And as you flow down this downspout, there's already, I've started digging. It's technically, right now it's just like a swale. It's a thin spot that's dug out. And I dumped the dirt over here to stop the water again. But eventually this is going to be another little pond about 10 foot in diameter. My original hand dug pond this direction is about 22 feet or so in diameter. So that gives you an idea. You can run your calculations. If you get up around 4 foot deep, you know, and 20 foot in diameter, you can figure out how many gallons that is. And then I'll have this pond, and the overflow for this pond is probably going to be behind the persimmon tree. I may make it higher in elevation this direction, but there's already water coming in, flowing down this little path as well already. I don't know if I need to add additional flow. So right now I'm thinking I'm going to have this flow, and it currently is overflowing right here this direction. And it gets to right around there where I'm pointing, and then cuts off to the left back into the original creek bed. But I am going to make that flow right there to that pink flag. Okay, so the pink flag, let's see here, try to get it in frame. I don't know, there we go, you can see the pink flag. So the water flow, you have your persimmon tree right here. Water flow is going to be right behind it, okay, and it will flow towards that pink flag. That pink flag is marking another low spot that I already have that fills up with water, and it becomes a mosquito nest. So I'm going to dig that out. It'll probably be anywhere from 4 foot to 8 foot in diameter. And its overflow will continue to go this direction and then flow down to the left and then back into the natural creek bed and natural contour of the land. And I can use all three of these ponds, get a solar pump or a hand pump and use them for irrigation, fish, wildlife, all that good stuff. And then they'll also serve as silt traps, sand traps for free soil. I might have to dredge this out. If I continue to allow that creek to flow directly into this system, then I almost definitely will have to dredge out periodically, and which is okay. If it ever dries out, I'll get in there and clean it out. So ideally, though, you would have none of this flowing in. It would flow into about here and hit a barrier, and then it would flow around the pond, that direction and this direction. And due to making the water stop and flow around and along the edges of the pond, it will seep and actually percolate into the pond that direction without any sediment. That'd be the proper way to build a pond down a hill. You don't want to have any major inflow into a water body like that. Otherwise, it will fill up eventually. So I think that about covers it. Hopefully I didn't forget anything. I've shot this video twice because I keep forgetting things to mention. But all the subsequent parts to this series on water management, I'm doing this partly to document it for myself, just in case I don't get to finish all this stuff. But all the subsequent videos will cover the water management in the lawn section of the yard. You can see the contour of the yard It's much more complicated over there on what I'm going to do to control water flow. And I've already started doing several things. Simply the way I've oriented and placed my garden beds is controlling water flow. So subsequent parts to this series will cover that. But as far as the Zone 4, Zone 5, pre-existing forest converted into a permaculture food forest section, these first 3 parts, that completely covers everything I plan to do for controlling water on this part of the property and making the most of that out of that free resource. Thanks for joining me, guys, and hope to see you on the next one. Leave any comments if you have any questions. I would love to answer them for you if I can.